College is a wild ride for young adults, and their mental health often suffers. This podcast addresses the inner battles many college students struggle with. You're listening to Normalize It Forward, where we have raw, unfiltered conversations about young people's biggest mental health problems, how to handle them, and how to achieve a more resilient mind. Time to get rid of those heavy burdens and focus more on self-love and care. Here is your host, Marc Lehman.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Normalize It Forward. My name is Marc Lehman, and I am a therapist from up in Connecticut. And today I'm so excited. We are talking to Emma Benoit. Forgive me, am I saying your name incorrectly?
No, it's fine. That's fine.
Okay. All right. I don't want to mispronounce your name. I'm terrible.
That's fine.
We are meeting with Emma Benoit. I'm so excited for her actually to tell my audience today a little bit about herself. Rather than me stumble through her intro, I'm going to give her an opportunity in a moment to do that. But Emma, welcome to Normalize It Forward. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So Emma, we're here really just to talk about mental health and wellness in general. And I'm really excited to have you on because I think you have a viewpoint that our listeners will be excited to hear. So without further ado, maybe I could toss you the mic if it's okay and have you tell my audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am Emma, and I am actually from Louisiana. I was born and raised here in Louisiana, in a middle-class family, as you know, your typical picture perfect on the outside, all-American girl. Was a cheerleader, had a lot of friends. Like I said, came from, a pretty happy home on the outside, but internally I was struggling with my mental health and my emotional well-being. And so I struggled pretty consistently for several years without ever really facing those struggles or feeling comfortable being vulnerable with someone and opening up and kind of navigating those emotional challenges that I was facing. I really struggled in silence for more of my upbringing than what I would have liked to struggle for. I was in kind of an uncomfortable situation with my struggles because of that exterior image that I kind of described. So typically, when you think of someone that struggles with their mental health and their emotional well-being, automatically because of stigmas and stereotypes, there's this sort of image that people think of, lower class, separated family, maybe some abuse in the home, things like that typically come to mind when most people think about these kinds of struggles with depression and anxiety. And so with my story kind of looking completely different from that, I often felt a lot of shame around my struggles and around my emotional challenges. And so because of that, I really believed in the stigma and I felt really ashamed for my feelings. And so I never reached out for help. Like I said, I just kind of struggled in silence, trying to manage my own feelings and stressors and fears all on my own. And ultimately doing that for far too long put me in a position where I started to develop some pretty nasty negative thoughts. I started to experience suicidality and thoughts of suicide. And I struggled with those thoughts for quite a while before actually attempting suicide myself. It got to be too much for me to navigate and manage all on my own. And without the resources or the tools or the supports in place, I felt extremely hopeless. And so all of those struggles and feelings essentially did culminate and result in a suicide attempt when I was 16 years old. So it was the summer before my senior year of high school, I actually attempted to take my life. And fortunately, as I'm here speaking on your podcast today, that attempt didn't work and it was not successful. And I've come on the most unpredictable but most gratifying journey since, and just getting to really reflect on the way that I was processing hard things, the feelings I was having, and learning things that I wish that I would have learned prior to my attempt really gave me this sense of purpose. So I decided to use my lived experience and the things that I had overcome and gone through to try and raise awareness and start important conversations like these to really educate people on the resources available to them and ultimately remove the stigma. That is my goal with sharing my story and my lived experience. It's just to remove that stigma that keeps so many people struggling in silence for far too long.
My goodness, my goodness. Well, let me just say, I am so glad that, as you said, the attempt didn't work. And I'm sure many others that have met you along the way, Emma, are as well. See, I knew you'd do a better intro than I would. I'm really glad you told us your story. And, one thing you didn't add, Emma, that I will, is that you speak all over about
Yes.
what happened, right? And all over the country. And, you've been on a number of shows and you've been on a number of campuses,
Mm.
middle schools, high schools. And I'm sure you've touched and resonated with many, many people. And in all honesty, that's one of the biggest reasons I was so excited to interview you tonight is, number one, I think you're a wonderful human being. But number two, I think there's a lot of people out there that have experienced very, very similar stories.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And you are 100% right. I have been given opportunities to travel the country sharing my story and getting the chance to interact with young people and hear their testimonies. It's all too familiar. And I feel like there is such an epidemic of mental health and especially, suicide. I mean, the youth suicide rates are at an all-time high. And, our stories are oftentimes very parallel. There's a lot of
Yeah.
similarities and things that young people can see within me that they see within themselves. So it really is such a great, thing that I get to do with getting to share my story and go to schools and, speak to groups of people who have similar experiences and similar struggles. Because ultimately, whenever you share your negative experiences, so to speak, or when you share a sorrow, that becomes half the sorrow. So whenever you open up and you have hard, vulnerable dialogue with people, it gives them kind of the freedom, for lack of a better way to put it, to
Yeah.
feel like, hey, this is something that I can overcome and it's okay not to be okay. So it's
Yeah.
just really giving people the space to feel seen and heard. And that's been such an incredible gift that I've been given with getting the chance to share my story so publicly is getting to help people in such a profound way and show them that your vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's actually a strength and, helping them feel empowered to use their voice and advocate for themselves and get the help that they need. And ultimately, like I said, just removing that stigma. If we can get to a place in society where mental health care is seen as the same as physical health care, and prioritized the same as physical health care, then I think we, have achieved a very large goal there. I oftentimes tell groups and students that I get to interact with and speak to, that we have to reframe our perspective and kind of create a new narrative in our minds when we think about therapy and counseling and mental health care and really truly see it as like a gym membership for your brain. That's what I tell
Mhm.
people. I
Mhm.
say,
Mhm. I
when
love it.
you're going get a gym membership for your physical body, no one shames that. No one puts a stigma around
Right.
that. Everyone is
Right.
encouraging, like, that's amazing. You're getting physically fit. But with mental health and mental health care, oftentimes it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, you're
Mhm.
not going through anything too serious, are you?
Right.
So it's really about shifting that perspective.
I am so in tune with what you just said. As a therapist, I've been treating people for 25 years, and 12 years ago, I created You Are Heard, which is a virtual platform where we see college students. And one of the first things I noticed from kids when I started meeting with them virtually was this notion of like, I can do this in privacy.
Mm,
I can do this right from my desk or a library room or wherever it might be. I can get the help that I so need without having to feel shame, without having to feel judged, without having to feel all of that extra garbage that, stops people from getting assistance, And as you said, the stats are not pretty for young people. And, I'm so thankful you have survived and you're here today to talk about it, Emma, but most people don't, right?
yeah.
And so, for parents, it's really important parents understand that young adults, they're going through a lot these days,
Mhm.
and that the statistics of suicide, which let's face it, is not a word people like talking about, right?
Mhm.
But it's the second leading cause of death in young people. And just to give everybody a sense, 10 years ago it was number 12. So it has grown and progressed. And those are reported, so it's probably a little bit underreported that way. But
Mhm.
that is something that is an impact on a family that is hard to put words to, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important, I think, for parents that are listening to understand that kids are going through a ton these days, and there are a lot of obstacles that are in place for kids to not get help. I'm amazed at how percentage-wise, like across the country, how few kids actually do get help. That's rising, and I'm very grateful for that. For people like yourself to open those doors and use the perfect word, give permission to get
Mhm.
help because let's face it, we all need it from time to time.
Absolutely. And I'm noticing that with the rise in the suicide rates amongst the young people, I'm noticing that whenever I share my story and they get to interact back with me, that they are eager to talk about these things. They are wanting and ready and willing to talk about these things. It's just like you said, giving them that permission
Mm,
to go there and to work on things. There's a quote and it goes, pain is passed down until someone is ready to feel it and heal it. So I
mm,
feel as though the reason why we're seeing such an increase in suicide rates and suicidality, especially amongst our younger generations, is because we've evolved as a people group, and essentially we are learning from our parents and from their parents the things that they were taught and things that were passed down that are actually harmful and unhealthy and dysfunctional. So I think that, there are so many different factors to why the suicide rates are so high. Several different factors, right? You have social media, the access to the internet,
mm,
the digital era that we all live in, the fact that these children today and people in my generation, Gen Z, we didn't have a play-based childhood. We had a
mhm.
digital-based childhood.
Absolutely.
There's so much out there that suggests reasons, clear indicators, causations and things like that. But I believe that the reason why we're seeing such a large, gathering or so much noise around this conversation is because people who are struggling, young people who are struggling, whenever they're given that permission, it's like they've been waiting for it, if
Oh,
that makes any
absolutely.
sense.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've experienced that as well, where I've been doing presentations and I start talking about that and all of a sudden hands go up,
Yes.
and people are talking about some really private things because
Hmm.
they haven't had an opportunity to talk about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I believe that a lot of young people walk around with these like masks on,
Hmm.
pretending. And you
Hmm.
referenced that a little bit. I guess I'm wondering back in high school because I think for adults outside of, adults that let's say parents, let's say
Hmm.
that age bracket, um, tend to point fingers at things like social media, right? And
Yep.
and they'll talk about the dangers of them, which I believe there are
Yeah.
quite a few of them. I think they're really complicated in terms of how they affect kids. But I wanted to ask you, in high school, you grew up in the midst of all of that, at the
Hmm.
peak of some of that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what that was like for you in terms of like in that phase, Emma, where you were keeping it all in.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree in the sense that, parents want to find a solution. They want to find a reason, sort of, something to blame, so to
Yeah.
speak. So I definitely relate to that. And that was a part of my experience, especially whenever it came to my parents, looking for reasons why my behavior was presenting in a different way, or reasons why I became isolative and not coming out of my room. So they did definitely point fingers at, well, it's social media, well, it's, hormones, it's puberty, all of these things. But ultimately, I feel like the biggest thing that is not talked about enough is relationships in your home environment.
Mm,
A big reason why I felt so much fear and shame around my struggles and my emotional kind of well-being was from the pressures that I was feeling from the external, and then also that I was placing on myself internally. You
mhm,
know, Nowadays, it's so much easier, it's so much more accessible for people to cast judgment and for them to be critical of you, your choices, what you wear, how you speak, what you choose to do. So I feel like that's a big reason why younger generations feel that need to create this pristine, picture perfect image and maintain that image so that way, mom and dad don't automatically look to blame something. Um, and also, so that way we're protected
mhm,
from being put in a box. Oh, well, it's social media. Oh, well, it's teenage hormones. Teenagers don't want to be put in boxes. They want autonomy. They want to feel like they're valued and respected as humans. They want to feel like you hear them and you see them. And unfortunately, I think a big problem is that disconnect in the
mm,
where, when a teenager is going through something stressful, or maybe they're dealing with a big feeling of fear, mom
mm.
and dad always want to blame and then fix. And that's kind of what I'm seeing is a very reoccurring issue amongst the youth today.
I mean, you said so much there, and I'm going to just pick on one word, and that word is here, because I feel like a lot of families don't do a great job of that. You know,
Yes.
like what you said, I'm trying to remember the words you used. They see a problem, they want to fix it,
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I find myself saying to parents in session, just listen,
Yeah.
just slow down,
Hmm.
listen, because you're going to hear certain things that you're not hearing when you're at warp speed,
Yeah.
and you're trying to fix running down the hallway.
Mm.
Because sometimes what they need you to do, teenagers that is not fix, and is just to be a sounding board. Hey, my day was terrible today. This kid said this, and this teacher did this, and this thing happened. And okay, download, like tell us it's
Mhm.
okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think what a lot of adults, and I'll speak for the adults in this zone, Emma, forget is that teenagers are still learning. They're still
Hmm.
learning about relationships. They're still learning how to make friends and how to keep them. They're still learning, when to share, when not to share.
Yes.
And I've even seen kids, and I guess I'm curious your thoughts on this. I've seen kids that are getting complimented for being brilliant or being beautiful or being athletic or being this or being that, that that I almost can observe them creating more of a shell.
Yeah.
Like you expect me to be brilliant. What
Hmm.
happens when I don't succeed? You
Yeah.
know? Guess I'm wondering your thoughts on that topic of like that type of pressure that isn't necessarily intended as pressure.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky line to kind of teeter with because, on one hand, you want to validate and encourage
Of
and
course.
empower a young person, but
Absolutely.
it's a fine line because what you're not remembering and realizing is a lot of times teenagers take the words of adults as, fact, and they feel like, well, now that they say this about me, that's an expectation that I
Mhm.
have to uphold. And so you get into the space where they don't necessarily always resonate with the compliment that you're giving to them, but they feel as though because you gave it to them, that now they own it and it's their responsibility to maintain it. So I often tell people, I encourage parents especially to get creative with how you're reassuring and filling your kid's cup.
Mhm.
Compliment them, assure them about things that no one can take away from them. What kind of person they are, what makes them special and unique, and build up that sense of self around those things and not what they can do, but who they
Mhm.
are.
Mhm. So for example, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm thinking as you said that, I'm so proud of you for showing integrity,
Yes.
like
Yes.
something,
Things
something
like
like
that.
that, and
Yeah.
catching them when they're being a good person, right? Just being
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah. Or even, to encourage them to be comfortable being vulnerable with you and having that close relationship, even encouraging them whenever they are having a meltdown and crying and expressing all of the emotions that they're feeling. Like, I am so proud of you for being vulnerable. I am so encouraged and inspired by your vulnerability. This is a good thing. It feels good to cry. Just like reminding them that, hey, I don't expect you to be perfect all of the time. And I really try to emphasize with parents, your goal should not be to make your child's path smooth and happy all the time. That's unrealistic. Your goal should to be able to have your kiddo feel everything and still be okay. And
My God,
also
that, that, that-
know that
you,
you are a safe space, right? So they
yeah.
have to feel everything and still be okay and know that you're the safe space that they can come to.
Oh my gosh, Emma, it's got to be written somewhere.
Yeah.
It's I think that I'll just say as a parent that, a lot of parents fall into that trap of feeling like it is their job. It is their
Mhm.
job to remove obstacles and
Mhm.
they're gonna ensure happiness, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, it is absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, so much of what you're saying resonates. And I think that as a therapist in session, when a young adult has allowed themselves a level of vulnerability and shared with me either a very private story or cried openly or whatever it might be, and I say to them, thank you for sharing.
Mm.
They look back at me and
Yeah.
think, no one's ever said that to me,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know? And I can't tell you how many moments I've had like that.
Yeah.
A little shocking. Like nobody's ever said that.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I always get the same question whenever I present my story and host Q&As. I always get that one question, well, what do you say when you don't know what to say? When someone is spilling all of the hurt that they are feeling or they're venting about a really hard day. What do you say? What do you say? And I always say, thank you for sharing. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much for sharing. Because the first time I heard that from my therapist, it was like revolutionary. It was groundbreaking because it feels so good to feel so safe with someone that you could be expressing what, society deems as negative, bad emotions, and you're still worthy, you're still valued, you're still loved. It's okay not to be okay. That is the essence of that quote. It is okay not to be okay. And saying to someone, "Hey, thank you for sharing that."
Yeah.
That takes care of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's huge. It's huge. And, I think that from a young person's perspective, young people are around mental health all the time.
Yep.
And I try to get parents to understand that we are too as adults. We just don't know it, some of us. But young people are talking about it, which is awesome. I think it's fantastic, but it can also be really overwhelming,
Yep.
So when I say to a parent, you should really think about as your child's going off to college, you should really think about, how will they respond if they have a friend who's going through it?
Mm.
And, I've had many parents over the years say to me, that won't happen. And I'm like, well, statistically, actually, it probably will. And again, it's a world. It's a world that I think young adults live in that parents don't necessarily want to understand. But once they start to understand, it makes a lot of sense that kids are dealing with a lot. They're dealing with just a ton. And even, even that concept, Emma, the basic concept of I'm okay, but my really good friend isn't. And that's bothering me a lot. Right.
Mm.
Um, So yeah, I mean, I'm going back to that point you just made about that question people ask you a lot of what do you say? I think it's really important that young people understand the concept of it's it's totally okay to not be okay. And
Yeah.
I'd take it a step further and say it's pretty normal.
100%. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping that, the parent generation, the older generations can really recognize that, maybe the way that you were taught to deal with big feelings, stressors, frustrations, fears wasn't really healthy. Maybe that was dysfunctional, and you've just been living in a state of fight or flight, nervous system all out of whack, and you're just living in dysfunction. You're not
Mhm.
really living, you're just reacting. So I really hope that we can get to a place where the adults want to engage in this world that our youth are, quite frankly, in. They are
Mhm.
in it.
Mhm.
So that's really going to be a crucial change and shift that I think we need to see in order to make the suicide rates go down, is engaging the older generations, engaging the parent generation, and encouraging them that, this is not something that you will ever escape. In fact, this is something that you've never dealt with. So it's understandable that you don't want to and that it's scary, but that makes it all the more evident that it's necessary.
Mhm.
And I see it all the time whenever I'm meeting with parents and giving them advice and encouraging them, that, whenever they get some therapy or they learn, ways to respond to their teen, it's freeing. It's so freeing to be able to learn the tools and learn the skills to be able to help your kid who, like you said, is still learning,
Yeah.
still experiencing things for the first time. And really, truly, I hope that we can get to a place where parents can kind of shift that thinking and remember what it was like when they were teenagers. That breakup is the end of the world for
Yeah.
her right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
You can't just toxic positivity it away and say, oh, well, that boy doesn't matter, you'll be over it in about a week. That doesn't, we got to just kind of shift our way of supporting one another. And I think, again, that's generational. Like
It is.
the way that your guys as parents encouraged you or discouraged you from opening up, it's generational. So it kind of carries on.
Totally is. It totally is. I love how you said that. And I think there's so much truth to that. I hear the phrase sometimes from families, we just don't do that in our family. We don't talk like that. And whenever I hear that, I always think, oh my God, their kids must be like, frozen, because the reality is it doesn't matter if, you're male, female, it doesn't matter what culture you're from, doesn't matter what area of the world you're from. We're all human beings. We all have feelings and we're all going to feel all of them from time to time, right? So the concept of giving permission, as we were talking about earlier, to be able to talk about it and discuss it just makes a person feel like, as you said, freer to
Mm,
be a human being and have those ups and downs and have good days and bad days and not have to be sort of this straight line, perfect, robot of a person, you know?
yeah, I totally second that. I mean, and it's really like we've been talking about, really creating a different perspective, a different image in your mind of the true importance of mental health and mental health care, and
Mm.
becoming equipped with the resources and the skills and the tools and the supports so that way you can maintain your mental wellness. So that way you're not a ticking time bomb waiting for the next crisis to strike. And unfortunately, tragically, that is how and why we're losing so many young people to suicide,
Absolutely.
because they're
Absolutely.
ticking time bombs, just waiting for that moment of crisis, that breakup, that fight with coach, that fight with mom, that failed test, that missed opportunity. They're just waiting for that crisis. And when crisis strikes is when horrible things happen. And unfortunately, teenagers are impulsive. My attempt was the result of a ticking time bomb
Mhm.
and then a moment of crisis, and I impulsively acted on it. So when we look at, the evidence that we have at hand, it always goes back to the family and the relationships that you have with your loved ones, especially the parent-child relationship, that relationship that you are maintaining. And I always say we need to get to a way of thinking and existing that is based around connection over correction.
I like
Kids
that.
need
Yeah.
rules, they need boundaries, they need structures, of course, because they're minors. But we can't have a healthy dynamic without connection, healthy connection.
Connection's huge. In some ways, it's everything. And, look, I know full well, as a parent, as a therapist, it's a hard question to ask your child. Hey, Johnny, are you okay? Are you feeling safe? Have you had thoughts of hurting yourself? That is not easy to ask your child. But I always tell parents, it's a hell of a lot easier to ask that than to go to their funeral. Like
And,
not even close. Like,
yeah,
y- you know, uh,
yeah,
and so let me just ask this and shift for a minute, Emma, because I think my listeners might be thinking about this, and I just want to give you a chance to shed some light on this. You mentioned that your attempt happened in 2016, and I think that you're about 23,
24.
24 years old, and you never want to get someone's age wrong. So
It's all
but
good.
I guess I wonder, is there a way to capture a little bit of your recovery and both physically and mentally since your attempt?
Yes, so I attempted suicide with a firearm. So I was left with a spinal cord injury that left me paralyzed from the neck down. So
Wow.
not only did I have to navigate the mental and emotional recovery, but I also had a pretty rigorous physical recovery as well. I had to pretty much relearn how to do everything for myself again, and that was extremely challenging. When you lose connection from your brain to your body, it is the scariest thing. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. It's very frightening to be trapped within your own body, but I really feel as though the physical journey that I had to go on taught me so many valuable lessons. It taught me, first and foremost, how to be truly grateful and practice gratitude.
Mm,
It taught me humility and recognizing where I was placing my worth and kind of restructuring that sense of self. It taught me patience and getting rid of that, desire to control everything. I had no control. So it taught me a great deal of patience and ultimately having to endure such an intense, rigorous physical recovery equip me with the emotional resilience in a way to be able to come out even better, brand new version of myself. And so I recovered physically for about 2.5 years. So typically with a neurological injury, a spinal cord injury, they only really give you about 2 years to make your recovery. Science things, I don't know, nerves regenerating, things like that. But I made a very stellar recovery in those 2 years. I was able to regain feeling and movement back into my whole body. So where I was once paralyzed, I can use every muscle in my body, and I've recovered to be able to walk short distances, and can live independently. I use a wheelchair, mostly throughout, day to day, just to get places efficiently and quickly.
mhm.
But overall, I've adapted and overcome far more than what the medical team could have ever predicted. Um, and like I
Amazing.
said, I think going on that physical journey kind of equipped me with the emotional and mental stamina and stability. Um, you know, Having to go through all of that really kind of renewed my perspective entirely.
That's amazing. That's amazing. First of all, thank you so much for sharing. Really, I mean, that's a lot to talk about. I think it's a lot to go through, and it is a very personal piece to your world. So I appreciate you telling my listeners about it. And Emma, I have to say, every time I've listened to you talk, I feel like you are a pioneer. You are a person who is leading the charge. You really are. You're leading the charge for young people to give them an understanding of like, listen, you can get through this thing called life, right? And things that you're going through, may seem really awful at the time, But you used the word grateful before. We need to be grateful for every moment we have here on earth, and
Yeah.
for every opportunity that we're given. Doesn't mean life is always easy, but we
Mm.
need to be grateful for that and keep pushing, because there's lots of really good stuff to come. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to.
Absolutely.
It's really amazing to get to share my lived experience with people and see the impact that it has on them. When I get to do this live and in person for audiences, it truly is very healing. It's therapy. It's therapeutic for me because you know I could have never predicted that this is what would have become my life and my reality. But I'm so fortunate for, opportunities like these to hopefully encourage other young people to be a voice and be an advocate because, it's going to take all of us. But if we want to see a change within our generation, we're going to have to be the ones to lead the charge. And
No
so
doubt.
I hope to be able to empower young people to do more of it.
I think you already have, and I know you'll continue to, Emma. So thank you so much for that. And let me just close by asking, the conversation of normalize it forward. We sort of have a template of wanting the conversation to continue for all of those reasons, and keep the conversation moving forward. And so what I usually ask is of my guests, if you have a friend, a coworker, or a relative, someone who you'd like to nominate to have for me to have on the show, going forward. Would love to get your thoughts on that. Anyone come to mind?
Yes. A couple of people, but the first one that I would encourage you all to have on your show next, I think it's Dr. Greg Hudnall. He
Okay.
is the founder and CEO of a program called Hope Squad. Hope Squad is a peer-to-peer based program that exists in schools, and it equips not only the students, but the teachers as well with a training similar to QPR, which I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar. It's
Mhm.
a suicide mental health prevention training
Mhm.
called QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. So the students are empowered to use their voice and their empathy to essentially be peer supports on campus. It's a really incredible, phenomenal program, one that I have had the great privilege of getting to share and promote across the country.
Mhm.
Actually, since the inception of me sharing my story, I've been able to inspire over 30 Hope Squads to start across the country
Awesome.
throughout all the different states that I've gotten to see. So it's an incredible program, and I think he would be a phenomenal guest for your audience. He has a lot of great insight. His perspective is certainly, incredible. So I would say Dr. Greg Hutnell.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. I'll get his info from you offline, but we'll have
Yeah.
Dr. Greg on. I love to talk to him about his perspectives, and
Mhm.
certainly his program sounds amazing. It really sounds phenomenal. So thank you. Appreciate you bringing him up. And again, Emma, I just wanted to thank you. I mean, your thoughts on this topic are truly amazing. I was thinking earlier, I'm like, gosh, my listeners might be hearing this and thinking they have so many questions for Emma, and they might just want to thank you as well. So, for them, I want to just kind of tell you, hey, thank you for making the time. Thank you for being vulnerable, and just thank you for doing what you do, because I think, there's probably people you're touching you don't even realize.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of young people will listen to things like this in private, and they'll say to themselves, I'm kind of like that, and maybe I need to make some changes, and maybe some parents are listening and they might think the same thing. So that's my big hope, having someone like you on the podcast. And again, I just want to thank you for making the space and coming on and sharing with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's such an honor
Yeah.
to get the chance to share. And I'm hopeful too. We share the same hope with the outcome of, getting together this afternoon to share and have a genuine conversation. So I'm very inspired by all that you do, and I'm hopeful as well that, we'll be able to help people that we won't even know about. So
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks again, Emma. You have yourself a wonderful rest of the evening, and we'll talk soon.
sounds good, Mark. Bye.
Yeah.
That's all for this episode of Normalize It Forward. May this conversation serve as a reminder that you are never alone in facing your mental health struggles. There are always people who can help. To dive even deeper into our journey of normalizing one of the biggest issues young people face, Check out more episodes of the show at youareheard.com. It's UAREHEARD.com. Continue gaining access to the right tools, the best resources, and the most insightful advice to achieve positivity, mindfulness, and genuine happiness.